3 hours after a billionaire CEO laughed at a janitor's son, that same CEO was escorted out of his own building. The boy he called Nobody had just saved a $50 million deal, and uncovered a truth powerful men had buried for 2 years. But this story isn't about money. It's about a father who died trying to tell the truth, a mother who kept working in the same building that broke her family, and a 13-year-old boy who walked into a room full of rich executives, carrying nothing but his father's lessons. If stories about courage, family, and justice matter to you, take a moment to subscribe. Because the stories we share here are about the strength ordinary people carry in extraordinary moments. This story begins on the 42nd floor of a glass tower in downtown Chicago. Most people working there wore suits that cost more than a month's rent. But Ethan Martinez wore worn sneakers and carried a backpack with a broken zipper. He wasn't supposed to be there. Every evening after school, Ethan waited in the janitorial break room while his mother, Maria, finished her shift. She cleaned offices, emptied trash, and wiped down the same desks where million-dollar decisions were made. To the people upstairs, she was invisible. To Ethan, she was everything. Maria had been working in that building for 15 years. After his father died 2 years ago, she took every extra shift she could. Nights, weekends, holidays. Sometimes Ethan did his homework while sitting on a supply cart. Sometimes he fell asleep under her coat. And sometimes he listened. Because this building talked. Through glass walls and half-closed doors, Ethan learned the difference between ordinary stress and the kind of tension that meant something was about to fall apart. That evening started like any other. The hum of office lights, the smell of cleaning solution, the quiet echo of distant conversations. Ethan was working through algebra when a voice exploded down the hallway. "You can't pull out now. We have a contract." It wasn't just anger. It was panic. Ethan slowly lowered his pencil. That voice belonged to Richard Blackstone, the CEO. A rich man who had built a $300 million company, and a reputation for being brilliant, demanding, and cold. When Mr. Blackstone raised his voice, people lost their jobs. Ethan knew he should stay where he was. But curiosity ran in his blood. His father used to say, "Problems tell a story. If you listen closely, you'll understand where they began." So Ethan stepped into the hallway. Through the glass wall of the corner office, he saw Richard Blackstone pacing, his face red, his expensive suit wrinkled with tension. His assistant, Sarah, stood nearby, frozen like someone watching a car crash. On the speakerphone, a calm voice spoke in careful English. "This partnership is no longer possible." Richard's hand tightened around the phone. "This is ridiculous," he snapped. "You're overreacting. It was just a misunderstanding." There was a long pause. Then the call ended. For a moment, the office went completely still. Then Richard threw the phone across the room. It shattered against the window overlooking the city. "Get the executive team," he said quietly. The kind of quiet that scared people more than shouting. "And find investors stupid enough to replace $50 million. $50 million. Ethan felt his stomach drop. That wasn't just a business problem. That was jobs. Hundreds of them. Maybe thousands. Including his mother's. Sarah rushed out of the office and nearly ran into him. Her eyes widened. "Ethan? You shouldn't be here. When deals fall apart, Mr. Blackstone gets mean." "What happened?" Ethan asked. She hesitated, then lowered her voice. "The Tanaka investment. $50 million from a Japanese partner. It was supposed to save the company." "Was supposed to?" "He pulled out. Said Mr. Blackstone disrespected him. Cultural protocol. Honor issues." Ethan went very still. "What kind of protocol?" he asked quietly. "Something about business cards. Gifts. Timing." I don't know. Mr. Blackstone doesn't believe in that stuff. He treats everyone the same. Ethan nodded slowly. Treating everyone the same. His father used to say that was the fastest way to offend people whose culture valued respect over efficiency. My dad talked about this, Ethan said. Sarah blinked. Your dad? Carlos Martinez. He worked here. Her expression changed immediately. The name wasn't forgotten. Carlos had been one of the smartest analysts in the building. He had also died in a workplace accident 2 years earlier. I know what went wrong, Ethan said. And I think I know how to fix it. Sarah stared at him. He was 13, wearing faded jeans, standing in a hallway where decisions worth millions were made. Ethan, this isn't homework. This is a $50 million crisis. My mom's job is part of that crisis, he said quietly. So is everyone else's. Before she could answer, the elevator doors opened. 3 executives stepped out. And behind them, Jennifer Walsh, the company's CFO. Her face told the whole story. Without that investment, the company wouldn't survive 6 months. Ethan took a breath. If this deal collapsed, 2,000 families could lose their income, including his own. My father taught me Japanese business culture, he said. Every night for years. Jennifer looked at him carefully. Why would he teach you that? Ethan swallowed. Because he said one day, I might need it to fix something important. Down the hallway, Richard Blackstone stepped out of his office. His eyes were still burning with anger, and they landed directly on Ethan, the rich man who ran the company, the poor boy whose mother cleaned it. And in that moment, Ethan realized something. If he didn't speak now, no one else would. He stepped forward. Mr. Blackstone, he said, his voice steady, I think I can save your deal. And the CEO laughed. The laugh wasn't loud. It was worse than that. It was the kind of laugh rich people give when they don't believe someone exists on their level. Richard Blackstone looked Ethan up and down, taking in the worn backpack, the scuffed shoes, the nervous but steady eyes. Then he shook his head. This building is not a playground, he said coldly. Go back to wherever you came from. Ethan didn't move. I'm serious, Ethan said quietly. You didn't lose the deal because of money. You lost it because you embarrassed him. That made Richard pause. Behind him, Jennifer and the executives exchanged looks. Sarah stood frozen near the wall. Richard turned slowly. Excuse me. You handed him your business card with one hand, Ethan continued. You didn't look at his card before putting it away. You interrupted him during dinner. And whatever gift you gave him, you probably treated it like a formality. The hallway went silent. Richard's expression changed. Just slightly. How would you know any of that? He asked. My father taught me, Ethan said. In Japanese business culture, respect comes before business. You don't start talking numbers until the relationship feels right. When you rushed him, it told him you didn't value him, that you thought you were doing him a favor. Jennifer stepped closer now, her eyes fixed on Ethan. Richard's voice hardened. This is ridiculous. I'm not taking negotiation advice from a child. Ethan swallowed, but his voice stayed steady. I'm not asking you to take advice from a child. I'm asking you to fix something you broke. Richard's jaw tightened. And how exactly do you suggest I do that? You apologize, Ethan said. Properly. In his language. With humility. Not like a CEO trying to protect his ego. Like a partner asking for another chance. Richard stared at him for a long moment. Then he gave a short, sharp laugh. You think I need a janitor's kid to teach me international business? The words hit the air like a slap. Sarah looked down. Jennifer's expression darkened. Ethan felt the sting, but he didn't back away. "My dad wasn't a janitor," he said quietly. "He was a strategist here. Carlos Martinez." For the first time, Richard's confidence flickered. He remembered the name. Everyone did. Carlos had been smart. Quiet. The kind of man who stayed late and never took credit. The kind of man who died in a construction accident that the company moved past very quickly. Richard's eyes narrowed. "Carlos was an analyst," he said flatly. "Not a strategist." Ethan's hands tightened around the straps of his backpack. "He spoke 4 languages," Ethan said. "Lived in Japan for 2 years. Studied international business at Northwestern. And he tried to warn you that respect mattered more than speed." Jennifer looked at Richard. "Is that true?" Richard ignored her. "This conversation is over," he said. "Security." "He's right." The voice came from Sarah. Everyone turned. She stepped forward slowly, holding her tablet. "I looked up the protocol after the Tanaka meeting," she said. "Everything Ethan described, that's exactly what went wrong." Richard stared at her, then at Jennifer, then back at Ethan. The confidence in his posture was fading now, replaced by something else. Fear. Ethan took a breath. "If you call him again the same way, he won't listen," he said. "But if I call him, I think he will." Richard's eyes snapped back to him. "You?" he said. "Yes. You're 13. I speak Japanese," Ethan said, "and I understand what he's feeling." Jennifer stepped closer to Richard, her voice low. "We're out of options. If that investment doesn't come back, we're done." Richard looked around the hallway. At the executives. At the CFO. At the assistant who had just confirmed the boy was right. Then he looked back at Ethan. "You get 1 call," he said slowly. 5 minutes. Ethan nodded. "And when this fails," Richard continued, his voice turning cold again, "you and your mother won't be coming back to this building. Do you understand?" The threat landed heavy in Ethan's chest. But he didn't hesitate. "Yes, sir." Jennifer handed him a phone. Richard recited the number from memory. Mr. Tanaka's private line. Ethan stepped into the corner of the hallway, away from the others. His hands were shaking. For a second, he closed his eyes. He could hear his father's voice. "Slow down. Respect first. Words matter." He dialed. The phone rang once. Twice. Then a calm voice answered. "Moshi Moshi." Ethan took a breath. "This is Ethan Martinez," he said in fluent Japanese. "I'm calling on behalf of Blackstone Industries. I am very sorry to disturb you. I'm calling to apologize for the disrespect you experienced today." The hallway behind him went completely silent. Jennifer covered her mouth. Sarah's eyes filled with tears. Richard stared at the boy like he was seeing him for the first time. There was a long pause on the other end. Then Mr. Tanaka spoke again. "You speak Japanese," he said. "Yes, sir." "Why are you calling instead of your CEO?" Ethan glanced back at Richard. The powerful man who had laughed at him. The man who still believed he didn't belong here. Then Ethan turned back to the phone. "Because my father taught me," he said softly. "And he taught me that when someone is disrespected, the first step is humility." There was another long silence. Then Mr. Tanaka said something quietly. "Tell me what your father taught you." Ethan swallowed, and began to speak. In the hallway of a glass tower, a janitor's son started a conversation that would decide the future of 2,000 families. And behind him, the richest man in the building was no longer in control. Ethan's voice stayed calm, but inside, his heart was pounding so hard he could feel it in his throat. "My father taught me that respect is shown before business," he said in Japanese. "He taught me that when a partner feels dishonored, the problem is not the contract. The problem is the relationship." There was no sound from the other end of the line. So Ethan continued. Mr. Blackstone spoke too quickly. He discussed money before trust. He did not present his card properly. He interrupted you. And if a gift was given, it was not offered with the care your culture deserves. Behind him, Richard shifted uncomfortably. Jennifer watched without blinking. Sarah pressed her hands together like she was praying. Ethan kept his eyes on the floor. "I am not an executive," he said. "I am not important in your business world. My mother cleans offices in this building. But my father believed something very strongly." He swallowed. He believed that business is not about power. It is about honor between people. The silence stretched. Ethan wondered if he had gone too far. Then Mr. Tanaka spoke. "What was your father's name?" "Carlos Martinez." Another pause. Then, quietly, "And why are you making this call, Ethan Martinez? Why not your CEO?" Ethan glanced back again. Richard was standing very still now. Not angry. Not confident. Just watching. "Because Mr. Blackstone doesn't understand." The thought came into Ethan's mind, but he didn't say it that way. Instead, he chose the words his father would have chosen. "Because my father taught me that when someone makes a mistake, the strongest thing they can do is admit it," Ethan said. "I am calling to say that Blackstone Industries made a mistake. Not out of disrespect, but out of ignorance. And we are asking for a chance to do better." The hallway air felt heavy. Even the executives were holding their breath. Ethan continued, more softly now. "There are 2,000 people who work here, sir. Families. Parents. People who depend on this partnership. I am asking you to reconsider, not for the company, but for them." The words hung there. A poor boy speaking for people who wore suits. A janitor's son asking a wealthy investor for mercy. On the other end of the line, Mr. Tanaka said nothing for so long that Ethan thought the call had dropped. Then finally, a slow breath. "You are 13, Mr. Tanaka said. "Yes, sir. And you speak of honor better than many executives I have met." Ethan didn't answer. He didn't know what to say. Another pause. Then Mr. Tanaka spoke again. "I withdrew my investment because I believed I was not respected. That this partnership would always place profit above relationship." Ethan nodded quietly, even though the man couldn't see him. "That is not what your father taught you." "No, sir." There was a long silence. Then the words came. "I will reconsider the investment." Jennifer gasped softly. Sarah covered her mouth. Richard took a step forward without realizing it. But Mr. Tanaka continued before anyone could react. "On one condition." Ethan's grip tightened around the phone. "You will be present in future negotiations," Mr. Tanaka said, "because you understand something your company's leadership does not." Ethan blinked. "Sir, I'm just a kid." "You are someone who listens," Mr. Tanaka replied. "That is more valuable than a title." The call ended a moment later. Ethan slowly lowered the phone. For a few seconds, no one moved. No one spoke. Then Jennifer let out a long breath she had been holding. "He's back in," she whispered. Sarah started crying openly. One of the executives leaned against the wall like his legs couldn't hold him. And Richard Blackstone just stared at Ethan. Not with anger. Not with arrogance. With something far more uncomfortable. Realization. The boy he had laughed at had just saved $50 million. Ethan handed the phone back to Jennifer. His fingers were still shaking. "Thank you," she said quietly. He nodded, not trusting his voice. For a moment, the tension broke. Relief moved through the hallway like a wave. But then Richard spoke. His voice was calm again. Too calm. "Everyone back to work," he said. The executives quickly disappeared down the corridor. Sarah wiped her eyes and followed. Jennifer hesitated, looking at Ethan, then at Richard. "5 minutes," Richard said to her quietly. She understood. When the hallway cleared, Richard stepped closer to Ethan. For the first time, the two of them stood alone. The rich man who owned the building. The poor boy whose mother cleaned it. "You handled that well," Richard said. There was no warmth in his tone. Only calculation. Ethan nodded politely. "My father taught me." Richard's eyes narrowed slightly. "Yes," he said. "Your father." There was a pause. Then Richard leaned against the glass wall, folding his arms. "Here's what's going to happen," he said. Ethan's stomach tightened. "When the board asks about this situation, I will explain that I guided you," Richard continued. "That you acted under my direction. That this was part of a strategy one approved." Ethan blinked. "That's not what happened." Richard's expression didn't change. "That's leadership," he said. "Managing the story." Ethan felt the air leave his lungs. "I spoke to him because you said no," he replied quietly. "And now the company is saved," Richard said. "Which means we present it in a way that protects the company's image." Ethan didn't answer. Richard stepped a little closer. "In return," he said smoothly, "your mother will receive a promotion. Facilities supervisor. Higher pay. Better hours. And you'll get an education fund. $50,000 for college." The number hit Ethan like a physical weight. $50,000. More money than his family had ever seen. Richard watched his reaction carefully. "All you have to do," the CEO said, "is let me handle the credit." Ethan's throat tightened. Behind the glass wall, the city stretched out below them. Two worlds. One built on power. One built on sacrifice. "My father didn't teach me to lie," Ethan said quietly. For the first time, Richard's eyes hardened. "Then let me be very clear," he said. And his next words made Ethan's chest go cold. "If you don't cooperate, your mother's job won't exist by the end of the week." The words didn't sound loud. They didn't need to. For Ethan, they landed heavier than any shout. Your mother's job won't exist. For a moment, he couldn't breathe. Not because of the threat to himself. Because of Maria. He pictured her pushing the heavy cleaning cart down long hallways. Her hands rough from chemicals. Her back aching every night. The quiet way she smiled when she thought he wasn't looking, just so he wouldn't worry. This job wasn't just income. It was rent. Groceries. Electricity. Security. It was survival. Ethan swallowed, his voice barely steady. "You'd fire her because of me?" Richard didn't blink. "I would restructure the facilities department," he said calmly. "Positions change. Budgets shift. Companies evolve." The words sounded clean. Professional. But the meaning was clear. "Say what I want. Or your family pays the price." Ethan's hands tightened at his sides. "My mom didn't do anything wrong." "This isn't about right or wrong," Richard replied. "This is about protecting the company." The boy stood there, looking very small in the wide glass hallway. But something in his eyes didn't shrink. "My father tried to protect this company too," Ethan said quietly. Richard's expression hardened. "Your father was an employee." "He was more than that." There was a long pause. For just a second, Something like irritation flickered across Richard's face. Then his tone went colder. "You have until tomorrow morning," he said. "Agree to the narrative, and your family's future improves. Refuse, and you'll find out how expensive honesty can be." He turned and walked back into his office. The glass door closed behind him. Just like that, the conversation was over. But Ethan stood there for a long moment, staring at the city through the window. All those lights. All those buildings. And somewhere inside them, people like his mother working twice as hard just to stay afloat. When he finally walked back to the janitor's break room, his legs felt heavy. The hallway seemed longer than before. The fluorescent lights harsher. He sat down at the small table where his algebra book still lay open. The numbers blurred. A few minutes later, the door opened. Maria stepped in, still in her cleaning uniform, her hair tied back, her face tired but warm the moment she saw him. "Hey, Mijo," she said softly. "You finish your homework?" Ethan didn't answer right away. Maria noticed. A mother always notices. She set her gloves down slowly. "What happened?" Ethan looked up at her. For a second, he saw the worry already forming in her eyes. The kind of worry that never really left since his father died. "I talked to Mr. Blackstone," he said. Maria froze. "You what?" "There was a problem with a deal. I helped fix it." She stared at him, trying to understand if he was serious. Then she sat down across from him. "Ethan, what do you mean you helped fix it?" He told her. About the call. About Mr. Tanaka. About the investment coming back. He didn't rush. He didn't dramatize. Just the truth. By the time he finished, Maria's eyes were shining. "Your father would be so proud of you," she whispered. Ethan nodded. For a moment, there was something warm in the room. Something hopeful. Then he said the rest. "He wants me to lie." Maria's expression changed. Slowly. Cold understanding replacing the pride. "He said the board will think it was his idea," Ethan continued. "That I acted under his direction." Maria leaned back in her chair. "And if you don't?" Ethan hesitated. Then he told her. About the promotion. The money. And the threat. When he finished, the break room was very quiet. Maria stared at the floor for a long time. Her hands rested in her lap, still smelling faintly of cleaning solution. $50,000, she said finally. Ethan didn't answer. "That's more than I make in 2 years." Still silence. Then she looked up at him. "Do you want to take it?" The question wasn't simple. It wasn't judgment. It was survival talking. Rent, food, college. A future that didn't involve counting every dollar. Ethan's voice was small. "I don't know." Maria nodded slowly. She understood that answer. Because she didn't know either. For years, she had worked quietly. Kept her head down. Avoided trouble. After Carlos died, she promised herself one thing. Stay safe. Protect Ethan. Don't fight people with power. But now her son had walked straight into that world. And the world was pushing back. Maria reached across the table and took his hands. "Your father had chances to stay quiet," she said softly. Ethan looked at her. He could have ignored things. Could have let other people take credit. Could have kept his job and avoided problems. Her voice shook slightly. But that wasn't who he was. Ethan swallowed. "And look what happened to him," he whispered. The words hurt the moment they came out. Maria's eyes filled with tears. But she didn't look away. "Yes," she said quietly. "Look what happened to him." The room felt heavy with the truth neither of them ever said out loud. Carlos Martinez had done the right thing. And it had cost him everything. Maria squeezed Ethan's hands. "I was angry at him for a long time," she admitted. "Angry that he didn't think about us. Angry that he chose principles over safety." Ethan blinked. "You were—" "I was scared," she said. "And when you're scared, you start thinking survival is the most important thing." She took a slow breath. "But every night after he died, I'd find his notebooks, his plans, his ideas, all the work he believed mattered." Her voice softened. "He didn't choose principles over us, Ethan. He chose the kind of world he wanted you to grow up in." Ethan felt his chest tighten. Maria wiped her eyes and looked at him firmly. "So now the question isn't what's easier," she said. "The question is, what kind of man do you want to become?" Ethan didn't answer, because deep down he already knew. But knowing the answer didn't make the choice less frightening. Maria stood slowly. "I'm going to finish my shift," she said. "And tomorrow, whatever happens, we face it together." She kissed the top of his head and picked up her gloves again. As she pushed the cleaning cart out into the hallway, Ethan watched her go. The woman who carried the weight of their whole world. The woman who might lose her job because of him. On the small table in front of him, his backpack sat half open, and inside it, the worn notebook his father had given him 3 days before he died. Ethan pulled it out slowly. The cover was faded. The pages filled with Carlos's handwriting. Strategies. Notes. Observations. Truth. Ethan opened to the first page, and something written there made his breath catch. Because it wasn't a business note. It was a message. And it began with the words, "If you're reading this, something has gone wrong." Ethan stared at the page, his fingers tightening around the edges of the notebook. The handwriting was familiar. Steady. Careful. The same way his father wrote grocery lists, birthday notes, and the little messages he used to leave in Ethan's lunchbox. But this wasn't a lunch note. The words felt heavier. "If you're reading this, something has gone wrong. I hope I'm wrong about that. I hope this notebook stays in your backpack and you never need to understand why I wrote any of this. But if things feel unfair, if someone powerful tries to make you quiet, then you need to remember something." Ethan swallowed, his throat tight. Outside the break room, he could hear the distant squeak of his mother's cleaning cart moving down the hallway. Inside, the world felt very still. He kept reading. People with power don't always win because they're smarter. Sometimes they win because they control the story. They decide who gets credit, who gets blamed, who gets ignored. If that ever happens to you, don't fight with anger. Fight with truth. Truth takes longer. It's harder. But it lasts. Ethan's eyes burned. He turned the page. There were folders taped inside the back cover. Thin printouts. Email copies. Notes in the margins. Dates. Names. And one name appeared again and again. Richard Blackstone. Ethan leaned closer. These weren't random documents. They were strategy drafts. International partnership plans. Negotiation frameworks. The same kinds of ideas his father had spent years working on at the kitchen table. Except something was wrong. At the top of several printed presentations, the final version listed Richard Blackstone as the author. But in the margins, in handwritten notes and early drafts, Carlos Martinez. Ethan's breath slowed. His father hadn't just helped the company. His father had built the ideas that made it successful. And someone else had taken the credit. The door opened quietly. Maria stepped back inside, pushing the cart halfway through before stopping when she saw the papers spread across the table. "What is all this?" she asked softly. Ethan turned the notebook toward her. "It's Dad's." Maria's expression changed the moment she saw the handwriting. She set the cart aside and sat down slowly. For a long moment, she didn't speak. She just touched the pages, like she was touching him. He worked on these at night, Ethan said. After dinner. On weekends. I thought it was just extra research. Maria nodded slowly. He said the company didn't understand international relationships, she whispered. He wanted to prove his ideas worked. Ethan flipped to one of the printouts. This presentation went to the board, he said. But Dad's name isn't on it. Maria leaned closer. At the bottom of the page, the signature read, Richard Blackstone. Her face went pale. No, she said quietly. Ethan showed her another. And another. Every time, the same pattern. Carlos's work. Richard's credit. Maria sat back slowly. 4 years, she had watched her husband come home exhausted but hopeful. They had waited for promotions, raises, recognition that never came. Now she understood why. He was stealing his work, Ethan said. The words sounded strange out loud. Too big. Too serious. Maria closed her eyes. That's why your father was so upset those last months, she whispered. He kept saying something wasn't right. That he was being pushed out of meetings. That his ideas were showing up in presentations he was never invited to. Ethan turned to the final section of the notebook. There was a dated entry. 3 days before his father died. Tomorrow I request a formal review with the board. I have enough documentation now. If something happens to me before that meeting, this notebook explains everything. Maria's hand flew to her mouth. He knew, she whispered. Ethan didn't answer. Because now the timeline was clear. His father had gathered proof. His father had planned to expose the truth. And 3 days later, the scaffolding collapsed. The room felt colder. Maria shook her head slowly. No, she said again, but this time it sounded like fear, not denial. Ethan looked at her. Mom, what if it wasn't just an accident? Maria stood up quickly, pacing once across the small break room. That investigation was closed, she said. They said it was equipment failure. But Dad filed safety complaints, Ethan replied quietly. You told me that. Maria stopped walking. Yes. And he was going to the board. Silence. The kind of silence where a thought begins to take shape, and both people are afraid to say it out loud. Maria turned back to him, her eyes full of worry. Ethan, listen to me. This is dangerous territory. He held up the notebook. Richard already threatened your job today. Maria's face tightened. And now you're telling me Dad was about to expose him before he died, she said. If that's true. She didn't finish. She didn't need to. Powerful people didn't lose quietly. Ethan closed the notebook slowly. So what do we do? Maria looked at the table. At the evidence the years of work her husband never got credit for the truth he had died trying to protect. For a long time, she said nothing. Then she spoke very quietly. If your father was right, then the truth is bigger than one job. Ethan watched her carefully. But the truth also comes with consequences, she added. And I need you to understand that before we take one more step. Ethan nodded. I know. Maria took a slow breath. Tomorrow morning, Richard expects your answer. The weight of that settled between them. Lie and stay safe. Or tell the truth and risk everything. Maria reached across the table and held his hands again. Whatever you decide, she said, her voice steady now, we do it together. Ethan nodded. But inside, his heart was racing. Because for the first time, this wasn't just about a deal. Or a job. Or even his father's memory. This was about a man who had already shown what he was willing to do to protect his power. And tomorrow morning, Ethan Martinez would be standing in front of him again. That night, neither of them slept much. Their apartment was small, quiet, and clean in the careful way poverty often is. Nothing extra. Nothing wasted. Every light turned off when not needed. Every dollar already assigned to something important. Maria lay awake in her room, staring at the ceiling. Ethan sat at the kitchen table with the notebook open in front of him. The clock ticked loudly on the wall. Every few minutes, he flipped another page. Strategy notes. Cultural frameworks. Meeting outlines. Dates that stretched back years. His father's life, written in careful ink. But what stayed with him wasn't the business ideas. It was the last message, written in the margin beside one document. If truth ever costs you something, remember this: silence costs more. Ethan closed the notebook slowly. He understood now. His father hadn't just been building strategies. He had been preparing for a fight. Morning came too fast. Chicago's winter light slipped through the blinds, pale and cold. Maria was already dressed when Ethan walked into the kitchen. She had made coffee for herself and toast for him, though neither of them seemed hungry. She looked tired, but steady. "Have you decided?" she asked gently. Ethan sat down across from her. "I'm not going to lie." Maria closed her eyes for a moment. Not in disappointment. In acceptance. Then she nodded. "Okay." That was all she said. No lecture. No fear. No argument. Just the quiet strength of a mother choosing to stand beside her son, no matter the cost. They rode the bus downtown together, sitting side by side in silence. The city outside the window looked the same as always. People rushing to work. Coffee shops opening. Cars filling the streets. But for Ethan, everything felt heavier. Because today, he wasn't just going back to wait in the break room. Today, he was walking into a fight. When they entered the building, the lobby felt colder than usual. The security guard gave Maria a small nod, then glanced at Ethan with curiosity. Word traveled fast in places like this. They rode the elevator to the service floor. Maria touched his arm before the doors opened. "No matter what happens," she said quietly, "I'm proud of you." Ethan nodded. Then the doors slid open. The hallway outside the executive offices was already busy. Assistants moved quickly. Voices spoke in low, urgent tones. Something was happening. Jennifer Walsh stood near the conference room, talking to Sarah. When she saw Ethan and Maria, she walked toward them immediately. Her expression was serious. "I was hoping you'd come early," she said. Maria's voice was cautious. "Is something wrong?" Jennifer hesitated. Then she spoke quietly. "Richard called an emergency board meeting." Ethan felt his stomach tighten. "For what?" "To present his version of last night," Jennifer said. "He's telling them he identified your talent, guided you through the Tanaka situation, and personally managed the recovery." Maria's jaw tightened. "He's already lying." Jennifer nodded. "And he's moving fast. He wants control of the story before anyone else speaks." Ethan looked at her. "What happens if the board believes him?" Jennifer didn't soften the answer. "Then he becomes the hero who saved the company. And you become a kid who got lucky." She paused. "And if you try to contradict him without proof, it could backfire. He'll say you're confused, emotional, influenced by your mother." Maria's hands clenched slightly. "That's why you came to us?" Jennifer asked carefully. Ethan opened his backpack and pulled out the notebook. Jennifer took it slowly. She began flipping through the pages. Her expression changed within seconds. Surprise. Then shock. Then something darker. "These are original drafts," she whispered. metadata dates, notes, meeting references. She looked up at Ethan. "Do you understand what this is?" "My dad's work," he said. Jennifer shook her head slightly. "This is evidence." Sarah stepped closer, reading over Jennifer's shoulder. "Oh my God," she murmured. "These strategies." Richard presented these to the board as his own. Jennifer kept turning pages. Email printouts, time-stamped documents, margin notes that matched finalized presentations from years ago. Finally, she closed the notebook carefully. Her voice was quiet, but firm. "If this is real." Richard didn't just take credit. He built his reputation on your father's work. Maria looked at her. "And my husband died 3 days after he asked for a board review." Jennifer met her eyes. For the first time, there was no corporate distance in her expression. Only concern. "Then this meeting isn't just about last night," she said. Ethan's heart was pounding now. "What do we do?" Jennifer glanced toward the conference room doors. Inside, the board was already gathering. "We don't let him control the story," she said. She handed the notebook back to Ethan. "Stay with me. When he finishes his presentation, you speak." Maria's breath caught. "He's 13. Jennifer nodded. "And he's the only one in this building who already proved Richard wrong." The conference room doors opened. An assistant stepped out. "They're ready." Jennifer looked at Ethan. "This is going to get uncomfortable," she said quietly. "Once you walk in there, there's no going back." Ethan glanced at his mother. Maria didn't speak. She just squeezed his hand. The same way she had when he was little. The same way she had at his father's funeral. The same silent message. "I'm here. Whatever happens." Ethan took a breath. Then he walked toward the conference room. Inside, 12 board members sat around a long table. At the far end stood Richard Blackstone. Confident. Composed. Already speaking. "And when I recognized the cultural sensitivity required, I directed the boy to make the call under my supervision," he was saying. Several board members nodded. One of them glanced at Ethan as he entered. Richard followed their gaze. For a brief moment, surprise flashed across his face. Then it disappeared. And he smiled. Because in his mind, the story was already his. But Ethan stepped forward. And when Richard paused, expecting silence, the janitor's son spoke. "That's not what happened." Richard Blackstone stood by the window long after the room emptied, his phone pressed to his ear, his voice low and controlled. But whatever he said in that call, it was already too late. Because some things, once spoken out loud, don't go back into silence. By that afternoon, the board had requested emergency access to company records. Independent auditors were brought in. Legal counsel arrived. Doors that had always opened for Richard without question were now closing behind him. Ethan and Maria waited in the small break room where the whole story had quietly begun. The same table. The same flickering light. But everything felt different now. Maria sat with her hands folded, not cleaning, not rushing, just waiting. Ethan sat beside her, the notebook resting in front of him. Neither of them spoke much. Because the truth had already been spoken. Now it was up to the world to decide what to do with it. Late in the afternoon, the door opened. Jennifer stepped inside. Her face looked tired. But there was something steady in her eyes. "It's done," she said softly. Maria stood immediately. "What does that mean?" Jennifer took a breath. The board voted unanimously. Richard Blackstone has been removed as CEO, effective immediately. The words settled slowly into the room. Ethan didn't move. Jennifer continued. "They're launching a full investigation into the intellectual credit claims. And the construction incident, that case is being reopened. Maria covered her mouth. For 2 years, that word had never been spoken again. Reopened. Ethan finally asked quietly, "What happens now?" Jennifer walked closer and placed a folder on the table. First, the company is issuing a formal correction. Carlos Martinez will be credited as the original architect behind the International Strategy Framework. Maria's shoulders began to shake. They're also establishing the Carlos Martinez Scholarship Fund for working-class students interested in business and international studies. Ethan stared at the folder. His father's name. Not hidden. Not forgotten. Recognized. "And there's one more thing," Jennifer said gently. She hesitated, then smiled a little. "The board spoke with Mr. Tanaka this morning. He insisted on one condition for moving forward." Ethan looked up. "What condition?" Jennifer met his eyes. "That you be officially listed as a junior cultural advisor for the partnership. Mentorship only. No pressure. Just learning." For the first time since the meeting, Ethan let out a slow breath. Not because of the title, but because someone had seen him. Not as a janitor's son. As someone who mattered. Maria reached for his hand and held it tightly. "You did this," she whispered. Ethan shook his head slowly. "No," he said. "Dad did." That evening, they walked out of the building together. Not through the service entrance. Through the front lobby. People were still working, still moving, still busy with their own lives. But a few of them stopped. Some nodded to Maria. One executive even said quietly, "Thank you for what your family did." For years, she had walked these floors invisible. Now people saw her. Outside, the cold air hit their faces, but it felt lighter somehow. Maria looked up at the tall glass building. "I used to think power lived up there," she said softly. Ethan followed her gaze. The same building. The same windows. But it didn't feel as big anymore. "Power isn't the office," he said. Maria looked at him. "It's the truth." She smiled. A tired smile. But a proud one. Weeks later, the investigation confirmed what the documents had already shown. Carlos Martinez's work had been systematically credited to Richard for years. And the reopened safety case revealed ignored complaints, missing inspections, and decisions made to cut costs. The accident that took his life was officially ruled preventable. Negligence. Not fate. Not bad luck. Someone had finally written the truth down where it couldn't be erased. The day the company installed a small plaque in the lobby, Ethan stood beside his mother. It was simple. Carlos Martinez. Integrity builds what power cannot. Maria touched the metal gently. "He always believed work should mean something," she whispered. Ethan nodded. "He taught me something too." "What's that?" Ethan looked around the lobby. At the people rushing. At the suits. At the cleaning staff moving quietly along the edges. "He said respect isn't about position," Ethan said. "It's about how you treat people who can't give you anything." Maria's eyes filled again. Because that was exactly who Carlos had been. Not loud. Not powerful. Just a man who refused to let the truth be small. As they turned to leave, Ethan glanced back one more time. 4 years, this building had been the place where his father was overlooked. Now it carried his name. Not because he was rich. Not because he was powerful. But because he had chosen honesty when silence would have been safer. And that was the moment Ethan understood something his father had tried to teach him all along. The emotional truth that would stay with him for the rest of his life. Real power isn't money. Real power is the courage to do what's right, even when you're afraid. Because in the end, wealth fades, titles change, and offices empty. But integrity. Integrity outlives everything. And sometimes the strongest people in the world are the ones no one thought mattered. If this story touched your heart, consider subscribing to the channel for more stories that remind us what truly matters. And tell me in the comments, which country or region are you watching from? Richard Blackstone stood by the window long after the room emptied, his phone pressed to his ear, his voice low and controlled. But whatever he said in that call, it was already too late. Because some things, once spoken out loud, don't go back into silence. By that afternoon, the board had requested emergency access to company records. Independent auditors were brought in. Legal counsel arrived. Doors that had always opened for Richard without question were now closing behind him. Ethan and Maria waited in the small break room where the whole story had quietly begun. The same table. The same flickering light. But everything felt different now. Maria sat with her hands folded, not cleaning, not rushing, just waiting. Ethan sat beside her, the notebook resting in front of him. Neither of them spoke much. Because the truth had already been spoken. Now it was up to the world to decide what to do with it. Late in the afternoon, the door opened. Jennifer stepped inside. Her face looked tired. But there was something steady in her eyes. "It's done," she said softly. Maria stood immediately. "What does that mean?" Jennifer took a breath. The board voted unanimously. Richard Blackstone has been removed as CEO, effective immediately. The words settled slowly into the room. Ethan didn't move. Jennifer continued. "They're launching a full investigation into the intellectual credit claims. And the construction incident, that case is being reopened." Maria covered her mouth. For 2 years, that word had never been spoken again. Reopened. Ethan finally asked quietly, "What happens now?" Jennifer walked closer and placed a folder on the table. "First, the company is issuing a formal correction. Carlos Martinez will be credited as the original architect behind the International Strategy Framework." Maria's shoulders began to shake. "They're also establishing the Carlos Martinez Scholarship Fund for working-class students interested in business and international studies." Ethan stared at the folder. His father's name. Not hidden. Not forgotten. Recognized. "And there's one more thing," Jennifer said gently. She hesitated, then smiled a little. "The board spoke with Mr. Tanaka this morning. He insisted on one condition for moving forward." Ethan looked up. "What condition?" Jennifer met his eyes. "That you be officially listed as a junior cultural advisor for the partnership. Mentorship only. No pressure. Just learning." For the first time since the meeting, Ethan let out a slow breath. Not because of the title, but because someone had seen him. Not as a janitor's son. As someone who mattered. Maria reached for his hand and held it tightly. "You did this," she whispered. Ethan shook his head slowly. "No," he said. "Dad did." That evening, they walked out of the building together. Not through the service entrance. Through the front lobby. People were still working, still moving, still busy with their own lives. But a few of them stopped. Some nodded to Maria. One executive even said quietly, "Thank you for what your family did." For years, she had walked these floors invisible. Now people saw her. Outside, the cold air hit their faces, but it felt lighter somehow. Maria looked up at the tall glass building. "I used to think power lived up there," she said softly. Ethan followed her gaze. The same building. The same windows. But it didn't feel as big anymore. "Power isn't the office," he said. Maria looked at him. "It's the truth." She smiled. A tired smile. But a proud one. Weeks later, the investigation confirmed what the documents had already shown. Carlos Martinez's work had been systematically credited to Richard for years, and the reopened safety case revealed ignored complaints, missing inspections, and decisions made to cut costs. The accident that took his life was officially ruled preventable. Negligence. Not fate. Not bad luck. Someone had finally written the truth down where it couldn't be erased. The day the company installed a small plaque in the lobby, Ethan stood beside his mother. It was simple. Carlos Martinez. Integrity builds what power cannot. Maria touched the metal gently. He always believed work should mean something, she whispered. Ethan nodded. He taught me something too. What's that? Ethan looked around the lobby. At the people rushing. At the suits. At the cleaning staff moving quietly along the edges. He said respect isn't about position, Ethan said. It's about how you treat people who can't give you anything. Maria's eyes filled again. Because that was exactly who Carlos had been. Not loud. Not powerful. Just a man who refused to let the truth be small. As they turned to leave, Ethan glanced back one more time. 4 years, this building had been the place where his father was overlooked. Now it carried his name. Not because he was rich. Not because he was powerful. But because he had chosen honesty when silence would have been safer. And that was the moment Ethan understood something his father had tried to teach him all along. The emotional truth that would stay with him for the rest of his life. Real power isn't money. Real power is the courage to do what's right, even when you're afraid. Because in the end, wealth fades, titles change, and offices empty. But integrity outlives everything. And sometimes the strongest people in the world are the ones no one thought mattered. If this story touched your heart, consider subscribing to the channel for more stories that remind us what truly matters. And tell me in the comments, which country or region are you watching from?